Next presentation is on human factors, and I hope to draw some connections between this and the preceding topics. So this is going to be actually a very broad introduction to the topic of human factors. We're going to go right from what remains cutting edge stuff on what's called recognition prime decision making, pretty exciting stuff, which is actually very relatively new science in this field. And we're going to go all the way to something called applied behavior analysis that started with Pavlov, and and some stuff in between. Okay, and they all have places where they apply, I think. And we're going to explore what those ideas are and when they might apply to our work. There's a funny thing, in that range, it's been an odd journey here with HealthInsight. We've literally come to know some of the leading thinkers, leading experts in the world on some of these topics. Applied behavior analysis, recognition, prime decision. We've met them, we've talked with them, that sort of thing. And the funny thing is, they don't know each other. They don't study each other's work. They don't. So you're getting an introduction that even some of the experts don't typically learn about. Okay. Human factors is a science of designing tools, tasks, and information work systems so it's compatible with the abilities of human users. And human factors includes both physical and cognitive abilities of people, but we won't talk much about the physical abilities today. Why did we study this? Human effort is raw material for healthcare. If we were building engines, pistons, we would study metallurgy, because that's the core science of forging pistons, or however they make them. I don't actually know. But we're not. Healthcare is made out of people's effort, decision-making, that sort of thing. So in order to have those systems work, we need to understand something about those humans, healthcare providers and patients. And our own internal processes depend on that as well. Okay, so this is, as I said, so we're going to start with something called recognition prime decision making. I'll get you to a definition here in a minute and a little history. But we'll use, for folks, this is an element of systems thinking as well, a property of systems thinking. And we learned this principle. This came from a fellow named Sidney Dekker, who is a human factors expert. He's an aviation safety expert. And this is a principle that he discovered, or he developed, through accident investigation. And he describes a challenge for accident investigators. The challenge is that we stand outside of the tunnel. He says that people are going through their work day making reasonable choices given their goals, given their mindset, given their understanding of the circumstances, given their mental model, that sort of thing. And we come along, and remember, this is accident investigation. This is aviation in this case. So you come along, and there's a crashed airplane on the ground. And if you find the cockpit voice recorder, you can start, if you will, observing what this crew did over the unfolding event. And it's easy to say, gee, why didn't they just, whatever? Why didn't they just pull up instead of pushing down? Why didn't they just divert? Why didn't they just do that sort of thing? And it's easy for us to, because we're outside of the tunnel and we know the outcome, it's easy for us to make those types of judgments, right? So that's the application in accident investigation. The same type of thinking, and he points out that if you're outside the tunnel and you haven't, died in a crash, you always get to win this game, right? Because you know the outcome. And you could say, they should have just done that, they should have just done that. It doesn't do any good. It doesn't help to understand why they did what they did. It doesn't help to prevent it in the future, but you get to win the game, okay? So the application in accident investigation is clear. There's actually a similar application, I believe, in much of our work. When we're involved in quality improvement initiatives, we have some pathway that we would like the people that we're working with to take. Oh, they should, this is the way this is the choice they should make, this is the direction they should go. And the problem can be, is if we don't understand the way those choices look like from their perspective, we're unlikely to understand or be able to help them make those types of changes. So, part one. Part two, recognition of prime decision making. This comes from a fellow named Gary Klein, who is a cognitive psychologist, studies decision making. He decided the typical choice, the typical model for human decision making goes something like this. We've got a problem or a choice to make. And what we do, this is called the rational choice model. And what is thought is we develop options. So we've got to solve this problem. We develop, or we got to respond. We got to make a decision. We list out some options, and then we start comparing them. This one has certain negatives. This one has pluses and minuses, that sort of thing. And then we list all the things we care about, and then we find the one that has the highest score, the best, and that's the one we choose. That's the direction we go in. And this is what Gary Klein was taught is the way that people make decisions. And he had this question. He said, what if this is a time-pressured situation? What if you're a firefighter and you arrive there's a fire and you got to figure out, do you grab the hose and rush in? Do you use your axe or whatever choices they have, or do we just sit here and wait till it burns itself? I don't know. But he said, what if there's no time to generate all these options and compare them? What do people do? And what he found out they did is they don't do this at all. They instead, experienced people, experts, respond to a situation and it has cues. Whatever the situation is, has cues. This is expert performance, and then there's pattern matching that goes on. When I recognize a pattern, I work through it through a quick mental simulation that lets me identify what are the correct actions, and then I just respond. I don't go through this sort of listing out a bunch of options and comparing them. In fact, and this was the dominant model in 1980 when he started working, and this is now among the in this field, this is the dominant model. Experts don't do this sort of thing. We are pattern matchers instead. And the finding was, it turns out this doesn't just apply to firefighters. This applies to a lot of high pressure situations, but it also applies to everyday decisions. In fact, most of what we do operates on this type of level. Okay, so why does this matter? Why are we talking about this? A couple of reasons. We'll review. In change initiatives, so much of what we do at HealthInsight is we seek to promote change in systems. Now, and we do that through working with potential change agents in organizations. Here's the problem we run into. The current practices aren't surprising to the people in these systems. In fact, most of our change agents, most of the potential change agents, and most of the changes that we would propose, the people have heard of and said no to already. In fact, they're skilled at saying no. By the time we get there, they've heard it before. They know how to say no. It doesn't even cost them any energy to do so. Right? So saying no to change agents is a skilled behavior. They know how to get us out of their office. Because they've practiced it a lot. So how do we get that? Or what can we do? What can we do in this circumstance? We have to change the conversation. So this is what I've called is a skilled rejection of change. So we have, and this comes up a lot. And the reason it comes up a lot, well, I'll come back to that. Skilled rejection of change. So how do we deal with that? Knowing that most of the conversations, most of the change proposals that we make are to people that have already said no to this change. We're rarely so much on the cutting edge that we're the first people that have proposed the change. Because the people that have already said yes, we don't need to change it. Okay? So by the time we get there, they've already said no. So how can we use this in our change initiatives? We need to change this conversation. See, what we've done is presented them with a situation and cues that activates the no thank you response. A practice skilled no thank you response. And so we have to present the change in a different mode. So we can reframe to connect with a different mental model. We can propose a different change. We can avoid anchoring on no to extend the decision-making process. I'm going to give you an opportunity to work through this here in a moment. Well, in fact, why don't we do it right now? So, why don't you huddle up at your table? Just take 2 minutes and talk about this question. Can you name a current situation where you might be encountering a skilled rejection of change? And describe some strategies that you might be able to do to approach that. So take a couple minutes and we'll talk about your results. All right, I'm going to cut this short. I'm sorry. I hope this has been a good first step, and it sounds like it was. So, and I'm going to highlight a parallel for you that some of you may have seen already. So, a completely different development process. We see something called, or we learn of something called motivational interviewing. Some folks may be familiar with this, the principle. One of the key principles that I thought was interesting that parallels this sort of, that employs this kind of thinking as well. Motivational interviewing grew out of the addictions world. And there is no one more skilled at saying no to a change than people that are addicted, right? Because the world has been trying to tell them to change their behavior, sometimes in very assertive ways, and they just find a way to say no, right? And motivational interviewing proposes you're not going to win that fight. So you got to change something. Go ahead. 3. Okay, we're almost out of time. So if we go back to this kind of framing, so we got to change this situation. We got to do something new, something different. And what motivational interviewing proposes is that instead of telling the person one more time, that we change the nature of the dialogue. Right? So it becomes, so the person starts telling us. So it's an interviewing. And I believe the reason it works is because it activates, got a number of, as it describes, it respects the person, it has all kinds of good things, but it changes the nature of the dialogue. And that's why, so we can connect that to this idea of, it gets them out of that skilled pattern of saying no that they're in. It's worth exploring on that front. So let's see. This is a skill Okay, again, human factors, how is this connected with human factors? This employs our best thinking about what human decision-making looks like. It connects to our ideas about, systems. Recall that we're going to have to get at behavior. Our healthcare providers are going to be asked to influence those sorts of things, and most of them don't approach it in this manner. What is our typical healthcare behavior change mode?
You need to do this.
It goes something like this. Yeah. Yes, and we've exhausted that mode. It's not going to start producing better results just because accountable care has come into play. So we're going to need better tools and that sort of thing. Same sort of thing for us. Why won't this work in our change initiatives? It becomes because our clients have become skilled at rejecting that proposal. So more on human factors. We've talked about, and this is, like I said, recognition prime decision making is at the cutting edge branch of cognitive psychology, decision making, that sort of thing. There's some other useful, this is more middle of the ground, or middle of the road stuff on human factors. So human factors, this is a condensed version. But it teaches us, if you get the 6 years that it takes to become an expert, here's the sorts of things you pay attention to. Someone doing something somewhere. And I'm going to, so we'll come back to that idea. I'm going to skip this exercise. But again, a systems thinking principle. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it achieves. So that in healthcare, for example, all the good, all the benefits, and all the bad, all the harm that we see in our work, the performance gaps, the cures, the caring, all that is a product of system design. Okay, so our work often starts over here. Healthcare quality less than adequate. We have something that tells us we're getting some result we don't want. And and one of our first jobs is to start understanding its potential causes. So we begin way over here, results. We get some targeted performance gap. Only 30% of patients are getting this, or too many patients are ending up like that. So that's our targeted performance gap. We don't forget that that same process, that same system that produces that, most of the time produces something good, but sometimes produces an outcome we don't want. One of our first jobs is to figure out, or one approach, there are actually other approaches, and we won't have time to review all of them today, but one approach is to start asking questions about, we got to go upstream and find out what didn't happen. Where was the thing that should have happened that didn't, or the thing that shouldn't happen that did? And we will find, when we get to that, we'll find some processes. And within those, we'll find tasks. And within that, we'll find there's an operator or an actor, somebody that's supposed to take some action. And we can start figuring out who they are, and we can ask, why didn't they identify this problem already? What is it that's causing that? Because all these processes, the tasks have operators, they're doing something, and somehow we suspect good intentions are still producing bad results. We'll come back to that more in a minute. So that's at the task level. These processes, these tasks are embedded in a larger organization and process, and those processes have designers, managers, owners. Why don't they see this problem? Well, they see it when it arises or the outcome. Understanding that is part of systems thinking. These are typically the things that we care about. These people ultimately care about as well. Yet, this is the result we're seeing. We could even, I mean, this is a vast simplification, typically, of what we're after. One of the recurring causes is that the initiating problem may be a long ways from the gap. And so it's hard for this process of this task owner to recognize or to see what is the ultimate outcome, what they're doing. That's not an uncommon situation. In fact, one of the things that we can help do is to highlight this. We can highlight our performance gap and try to understand where are the places where that can originate, and bring that feedback back to people. At the end of the day, though, we see some task here. We see something that didn't happen that was supposed to happen, or the other way around, something that was supposed to happen that didn't happen. And we can identify that. If we've done our work, we can identify that at a task level. We can figure out there's a operator. We don't care about their name. But there's a person that was supposed to perform some action and they didn't. And we've used this idea of the big three to try to organize our thinking around that. How can that happen? How can it be that the operator doesn't do what we expect him to do? And this is a useful way to start organizing thinking. First explanation, cause, is what we call planning errors. If somebody doesn't know what they're supposed to do, then they're going to get it wrong quite often, right? But that's a plausible explanation, right? We found a problem with a task wasn't performed correctly. Maybe the operator didn't know what they were supposed to do. Okay? But that's not the only way that could happen. Second way is something called execution error. That is when the operator knows the correct action and I intend to do it, but I get distracted or I get interrupted, which is different, right? In this one, I don't even know what the right action is. In this one, I know what it is. I intend to do it. And something interrupts me, something impacts my attention. And then the third of the big three, a violation. The operator knows the correct action. They know that they're supposed to do it. They know it applies in this situation. And in fact, they could perform it. All the necessary equipment is available. And they choose to do something else. Okay? 3 different circumstances. Does any one of those ideas unfamiliar to you? Okay. So, let's take a look. Whoops. While we do, again, brief huddles, I'll give you 5 minutes, work through these questions. In fact, if you look at, so there's a 2-part activity. So the first one asks, so we recognize the big 3 ideas. We can take our targeted performance gap and we can identify some tasks that we think are associated with that. So there's 2 parts I'd like you to work with. Just talk with folks in your groups. These questions. Can we tell which one of these is likely to be going on? How would we know? Does it matter? How are these different? And then, what types of solutions might we apply in the different situations? What types of solutions are unlikely to be effective? So I'd like you to spend, let's do, I'm going to put you on a budget here, 3 minutes on the first set of questions, this diagnosis, and 3 minutes on the second set of questions, the strategies, in groups of 4 or 5, whatever works for you. So 6 minutes. So what do you think? Let's start with this diagnosis question. So what do you think? How would you know which of these you're dealing with? You got something, you got somebody that ain't doing something we want them to do. How would you know? Or, hang on. Is it worth knowing? Why does it matter? Okay, why does it matter? What's that?
The solution will be different.
Solutions will be different. That's what you had as well?
We want to do better. We want to improve the process.
Okay. But we got to understand why. Okay, so what are the clues you're looking for? How would we know which one we're dealing with?
Interviewing the person.
So we could talk to people. So.
Wow.
Okay, good. we can talk to people in a way that won't make them lie to us, right? Because if they feel threatened, go ahead.
Number one of public health assessment, ask your patient, and then ask them first.
Ask the operator. So we talk to the operator. What else?
Look at where in the process it happens. Is it early in the planning stages? Is it later?
What would that tell us?
If it's planning execution?
Okay. Okay.
Who's responsible for the breakdown?
What's that?
It may tell you who's.
Okay. All right. So we got to isolate the gap. Okay. Okay. There's something else. Go ahead.
I think you need to observe in addition to talk. Because I know how to use my inhaler. Yeah, right. Show me how
Okay.
it is. And they think they do, but they don't.
Right. Good.
If we're involved in a system or a team, then it might be difficult to pinpoint who is responsible, so you need to do a little bit more digging.
Okay. Yeah. Analysis. Right. Good. Because if all we're looking at is right here, in principle, our failures, we might have, sometimes it comes from here, sometimes it comes from there, sometimes it comes from there. You can't tell until you've done that type of analysis. There's a couple of, they're good. This is the types of things I think of. There's one starting place that I begin with is essentially if I can get it to the task level, if I have some idea of the frequency that we're seeing the failure. If it's a knowledge gap, if people don't know what they're doing, then it's kind of random whether it happens or not. It'll be a very high failure rate. People don't forget at a high rate. It just doesn't, you'll see error rates of, 5, 10% at the most from execution errors. They just don't forget every time, every day. And the other one is with violations, if the failure rate changes when somebody's being observed, it's not a planning error. Right? They know what to do. They change their behavior when they're being observed. It's a violation. So those are the types of things. Yeah, okay. So how about this? Strategies. So pick your favorite. Who wants to, what are some strategies one would use for a planning error?
Education.
I thought education doesn't work. So every quality improvement conference I go to, they say education doesn't work. And yet, why would it work in this circumstance?
Well, because we're saying there's a knowledge deficit.
Yeah, so if somebody doesn't know what to do, go ahead and educate them. Don't listen to that quality improvement stuff, right? Right?
There's one place for it.
Well, when people don't know, yeah, go ahead. What else?
Monitoring.
Monitoring? So monitoring in conjunction with something else, or?
With your plan correction.
Okay, all right. So you're going to take some actions and we're going to make sure it worked. Okay. What else can we do?
Maybe some peer-to-peer mentoring.
Okay. Mentoring. So that is a form of education, right? Okay. Okay.
Ask the patient to teach you what we're supposed to do. Teach back.
Teach back. Okay. Good. Let's talk about execution errors.
How many distractions and interruptions are in the environment?
So we can reduce distractions. Or interruptions. What else?
We may need to evaluate the staffing ratio too.
I'm sorry.
The ratio of the staffs available.
Okay, all right. So workload. Okay.
You do a root cause analysis to find out why there was the error.
Okay, so we have, and we figured out it's an execution error.
So why was there an execution?
Okay, all right, so.
We'll do that with all of them.
Good.
Timing.
Change the timing of the
The
task?
tax, yeah.
Okay. Okay, very good. How about violations?
Build trust, do not trust the person that's advising.
We talked about motivational interviewing and techniques to try to.
Okay.
I think monitoring might be a good one for violations as well.
Monitoring.
Review.
Incentive.
Incentives. Feedback. Okay. Amy, now's the time for that handout that we were talking about. So we worked on this some years ago now, and this was the sort of thing that we came up with. It's something, an intervention selection tool. You'll see it that outlined this. We as we came to problems, what we found is that it wasn't part of the typical practice in quality improvement, systems improvement efforts to explicitly frame these questions in this manner. Even though, we can see that these are pretty different circumstances. That is, if somebody doesn't know what to do, teaching them what to do is potentially a useful strategy. So let's see. And you have, so the first one is, the first page is like a decision tree. You walk through it and ask those types of questions. And then each page that follows that is a suggested list of change approaches that make sense in those different circumstances. Some of the ones that have come up, and I'll give that. Well, I will leave that mostly to you to review on your own. There's one of the planning error strategies that we didn't talk about, and this actually applies to execution errors as well, is you can specialize. You can shift the task. So if we've got, we can, rather than having somebody that doesn't know how to do it, we can change the task so that it lives with somebody that does. So that's one of the strategies. On execution errors, there's a lot of, and actually this has some influence on planning as well, there's a lot of good work on implementing checklists. That actually much of it has come out since we developed this, although I think we included checklists in that as well. But the strength of that as an intervention is really something. But there is you can also redesign the task so that it comes. So how do you reduce distractions and interruptions? What's an interruption in healthcare? It's usually a family member with a question, right? Is that an interruption, or is that why we're there? So can we move this? Can we move some tasks to such that it's not subject to that sort of thing? Is one of the design challenges. So, and as I said, I'll leave that with you, but we have to spend some more time on violations. The reason we have to spend more time on this is because we were all taught the wrong way to think about violations. I'm sorry, we were. I was, and almost certainly you were, although maybe you weren't. We'll find out here in a minute. So, the place we learned about this, the main place we learned about this when we first started studying actually patient safety, there wasn't a field of patient safety back then. And so we had to look at other fields. And one of the fields we studied was occupational safety. And occupational safety had a well-established, and at least there was some well-established and enlightened thinking around safety in organizations. And they had to deal with this problem effectively. The problem they had to deal with is that under some circumstances, people will put their own arm into moving equipment. Okay? So they have a very high incentive not to do that, right? Because they're, attached, if you will, to their arm. They don't want to lose it. They don't get a raise by doing that. Yet you can set up circumstances where that occurs. And they came to see that this was a product of this principle, that every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it achieves, and that procedural violations are designed into systems. It doesn't do any good to blame Lefty for that outcome. This is something that reinforces this. This comes from a friend of ours. We learned a great deal of about root cause analysis from a guy named Dave Marks, who you may know from his work in Just Culture. Preceding that, he helped with developing processes for root cause analysis and developed these rules of causation, which we teach and which I won't go through in detail, but I highlight rule of causation number 4. Violation of procedures are not final causes. They must have preceding causes. In order for something to be a violation, you have to be able to establish that the operator knew the rules, the procedure. They knew that it applied. They knew that it applied to them. So it was their duty. You have to be able to demonstrate that they could have done it. All the materials were there, so it was enabled. You have to be able to demonstrate that they didn't forget. Okay, so it wasn't an execution error. And they chose to do something else. Now, for most of us, once we've built this case, our job is done. We found the problem, and it was wearing a name tag. Right? That's the way we've been taught. If you can establish all this, I'm done. I know. What do you mean? I have to have a preceding cause. What could be the possible preceding cause for something like this? Where am I even going to look if I can establish all this? Dave tells us we're not done. Okay. What he suggests, or what this suggests to me, I believe, is that a couple things. You will almost certainly not find the violation on the first time it's ever happened. Right? This is, if we found this today, it was going on yesterday and the day before, and we didn't see it. That's what makes it a system problem. Is it violated? These sorts of things are driven by, our usual suspect is that these behaviors are the outcome of goal conflicts. In fact, we'll even be a little more precise about that. But the point is, we can anticipate that these behaviors arise in systems. Because we're enlightened managers or owners or quality improvement people. This is part of the human condition, right? Now, this idea of violating a procedure, that's not new to any of us, right? So the systems that we're operating on are at risk for this sort of thing. Part of the manager or owner or improvement specialist in such a system is to systematically identify such problems and prevent them. So, let's see. Here are some of the key principles, or here are the key principles that we learned from studying something called applied behavior analysis, which is a important occupational safety management method. And a couple of key, probably the most important one, or the most important one for me, has been this second one. When we see persistent procedural violations in any environment, we can expect that behavior is being reinforced by the environment. This is the root cause. The other way to state it is that these violations are likely to be driven by consequences. The consequences that accrue to the operator after, as a result of the violations. The consequences we look for they're labeled as soon, certain, and positive. They follow immediately or almost immediately from the violation. They happen with great certainty, and they are some positive outcome for that person. They don't have to be a big positive outcome, but they're a positive outcome. Is anybody on the way home this evening, when you're driving home, will anybody be surprised if they see somebody run a red light? You're familiar with that. What are the consequences of running that red light? Most of the time, what are the consequences?
Nothing.
No, then why would people do it?
Get there faster. Wherever they're going faster.
They don't get there much faster, but in that moment, they get some benefit. It feels like they're getting there faster. And that consequence, and that's a consequence. That consequence comes right away. It's in that, breaker, accelerate. Pretty certain, pretty darn certain, and it's positive. And that's enough to make people risk their lives. And you'll see it on the way home. And that's enough to make people risk their lives. How much lower a standard is applied when you're risking somebody? I'm sorry, when it's our quality indicator or some other, do I do the screening today? Not today. And usually, and to be fair, what sets us up for this in healthcare is it's almost always about saving time. It's almost always about goal conflicts, two legitimate goals. Not saving time so that I can take a longer lunch break. It's saving time because I've got this patient need and I've got this patient need, and I don't feel like I can deal with both of them. Or I don't want to inconvenience a family member, or I don't want to inconvenience somebody else on my team. So if we're going to deal with these effectively, it's really important to understand those drivers. And the key driver being reinforced in the environment in some way. And another key driver is it doesn't take a big consequence to have people take big risks. Here's a little bit of history. Once we developed some training to illustrate these points, and who knows? Folks work with most of you work with Emily Sim directly. So everybody knows Emily, right? She was on the team. She was on the team working on this, and she's used a fictional example of it was a workplace occupational error of not using goggles to protect your eyes in certain circumstances. Then it comes up in healthcare as well, right? Certain circumstances. And she said to walk our team through the diagnosis exercise, she says it's not enough to know that to see somebody without goggles on to know what to do about it. Because they could be they could have never been taught. That has a certain set of solutions. They could have forgotten today. That has a type of solution. Or they could decide that they don't like the way the goggles look or feel. So that was 2002, 2004, something like that. Do folks know who Atul Gawande is? He wrote the Checklist Manifesto and some other influential New Yorker articles. He also wrote a brief example about, this is going on in the U.S. Army, having soldiers being blinded by those improvised explosive devices. And they looked at it, they said, how can we prevent that outcome? Can we get them to the eye doctor faster? Is there stuff we can do? As they started looking at it, they said, you know what? Half these guys aren't wearing the goggles we gave them. And you know why? They said, they talked to this, they talked, where was it? Who said it? We gotta talk to people. Anyhow, we had it up there. They talked to the soldiers. They said, those look like granny goggles. So they redesigned the goggles. They gave them cool looking goggles and they started wearing them all the time. So they removed the goal conflict. You know, there's a whole lot of other inducements that you can provide in a military setting, right? You can compel a lot of behavior. So they could compel behavior and they could show them the guy with the eye patch and all that. And it's like, is that the approach I want to take? Or could I just spend the money on better goggles, cooler goggles that actually didn't cost any more? They just look cooler. And then they'd wear them. A good example. I mean, why, if you can get away with it, if you can resolve a goal conflict, do it. I was working with a team from a hospital in one of our states. They had an unfortunate incident. They'd given the wrong blood type to a patient and killed him. And this was a small hospital. There were 2 techs that worked in the blood bank. Everybody knew that when Tech A was working, you got your blood a lot faster than when Tech B was working. And they sure appreciated Tech A for that. All the time. Boy, it was so much better when Tech A was working. I get my stuff right away. They reinforced that behavior right up until the day they killed the guy. Nobody ever asked, gee, why does Tech B take twice as long to do this task as Tech A? And that sort of thing. So it was an example of, and I worked with a team, they said, yeah, we liked working with that. We didn't realize the behavior that we were reinforcing. That's the sort of thing to think about with procedural violations. I invite you to think about others. This is our first time with this training, so I didn't carve out enough time for all the activities that I wanted. But I hope that this brief review can illustrate some different ways of thinking about procedural violations, because if you're involved in quality improvement in any in any setting, this is part of the game. So what do we think about? Again, somebody said talk to people. So involve the frontline staff in review, analysis, and redesign processes when we're dealing with procedural violations, such that we unearth those goal conflicts, those sorts of things. This is another place, having done that, having involved frontline staff, a checklist approach is a familiar or a powerful way to get at that. So we make the expectations clear. We involve everybody in the creation of those things. We identify what goal conflicts they create. We try to resolve those. But at the end of the day, it's likely we're going to be left with some behaviors, some actions that are that people just have to plain do. They have to buy into, and developing checklists for that can be powerful. And somebody actually mentioned this as well, I think. Implement that with consistent, systematic, non-punitive peer feedback to reinforce the desired behaviors. So let's see. Whoops. Oh, I had one more. Go ahead. Could you pull up the last presentation? Go ahead.
When we, as a reaction to this, the impact that interviewing or adding a policy would have, sort of the emotional, judgmental component that also.
Right, and I really appreciate that. What Deborah's reminding me of is that our work in, I mean, we're coming in the middle of the movie here. Right? And every organization that we're going to work with already has a way of approaching or dealing with violations. And one of the ones that we see often is, guess what? There's a new Mike Silver policy now. Whatever he did that day, we're going to outlaw it. and we're going to distribute, and everybody's going to sign off that they've seen the policy and now don't violate it anymore. What's the impact of something like that? Concern is we're just piling on more and more stuff. We're never dealing with the we're never dealing with the underlying goal conflicts and things like that. The other standard approach, we just didn't talk about, thank you for bringing that back up. What's the other standard approach to violations? Reprimand or worse, right? We're going to punish you in some way. And we might not even call it punishment. What are we going to call it? We're going to re-educate you. But make no mistake. This is a punishment. And the science, the best evidence we have available to us is that is not an effective way to handle violations. For any number of reasons, it sets up a culture wherein management becomes police. What it does is, rather than surface goal conflicts that we can all work on together, it drives those underground. We just seek to hide the behavior from supervisors and things like that, and right up until we kill somebody with a blood transfusion. Thanks for bringing that up. So we've talked about today determinants of health, human factors, and I think we've been able to tie some of that together with systems thinking. Whoops. Well, that was less than what I'd had in mind. I guess I had another slide that, actually all I was going to do is what do you think? Actually, there's two parts. You've got an evaluation sheet. I'd really appreciate your thoughts and your feedback and ways that we can improve this. But comments, thoughts, what do you think? Does this have applicability to your work? Please, go ahead.
I've had to do a lot of medication violation incidents, and this really got me thinking. There are so many things I could have done. My decisions could have been different. Because I'm looking at this, they could have just forgotten the procedure. And I'm trying to remember, I don't ask them, did you forget? So maybe I have to reevaluate the way I do the intervening, especially in medication monitoring issues. Because they could have just forgotten. But most nurses will not want to say I forgot, because they might look stupid. So I have to evaluate.
That's the price we pay for having a brain, is that we forget sometimes. Very good. I really appreciate your participation and time today. I hope this was worth your morning. So, okay. And we'll... I expect there'll be additional opportunities to learn to go deeper in all these topics in the future. This is kind of a startup of this process. So thank you again.